Hey, what's up, A-Push kids? We're back for our next lecture in AP US History. Today we're going to be covering topic 8.11, the Civil Rights Movement Expands. Today we're going to be looking at Learning Objective 8L, which says, explain how and why various groups responded to calls for the expansion of civil rights from 1960 to 1980. Our first key idea says Latino, American Indian, and Asian American movements continue to demand social and economic equality and a redress of past injustices. So our main focus today is how all of these other groups are going to be inspired by and continue the movements that were first formulated by the African American Civil Rights Movement. Our first one we'll look at is Latino Americans. Now, most Hispanic Americans before World War II lived in the Southwest states. But in the post-war years, new arrivals from Puerto Rico, Cuba, and the South and South and Central America increasingly settled in the East and Midwest. Mexican workers, after suffering deportation during the Great Depression, returned to the United States in the 50s and 60s to take low-paying agricultural jobs. Many of them embraced their Mexican heritage, or La Raza, and fought for voter registration, poverty reforms, and bilingual educational programs. Now, they were widely exploited for the most part in their work environments before a long series of boycotts led by Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Workers Organization finally gained collective bargaining rights for farm workers in 1975. Mexican-American activists also won a federal mandate for bilingual education, requiring schools to teach Hispanic children in both English and Spanish. Now, by the 1960s, American Indians had the lowest income, worst health, highest suicide rates, shortest life expectancy, and highest unemployment rates of any minority group in the United States. Native American activists tried to draw attention to these conditions by suing the federal government and organizing protest marches to demand Indian autonomy and the return of Indian lands lost because of broken treaties. In 1969, 78 Indians occupied Alcatraz Island in San Francisco Bay. In 1972, the militant American Indian movement, known as AIM, occupied the Bureau of Indian Affairs in Washington, D.C. And in 1973, 200 armed AIM members took control of Wounded Knee in South Dakota, the site of the 1980 massacre of Indians. In each of these protests, American Indians brought attention to their cause. Now, Americans of Asian descent had become the fastest growing ethnic minority by the 1980s. The largest group of Asian Americans were of Chinese ancestry, followed by Filipino, Japanese, Indians, Koreans, and Vietnamese. A strong dedication to education resulted in Asian Americans being well represented in the best colleges and universities. However, at times, Asian Americans suffered from discrimination, envy, and Japan bashing, while the less educated immigrants earned well below the national average. Now, Asian Americans had faced discrimination in the United States, such as the Chinese Exclusion Act, Japanese American internment during World War II, and anti-Asian attitudes during the Vietnam War. But Pan-Asian groups gained Asian American studies programs in colleges, health services, and even in the 1980s, reparations for interned Japanese Americans. Leading us to key idea number 2. Feminist and gay and lesbian activists mobilized behind claims for legal and economic and social equality. Now, the gay liberation movement started in 1969, and a police raid at the Stonewall Inn led to riots throughout New York City. It was the beginning of the gay and lesbian movement in the United States. Members soon joined together to form the Gay Liberation Front, or GLF, and this was formed to bring an end to discrimination against homosexuals. The GLF emphasized gay pride and encouraged people to, quote, come out of the closet. They also began organizing their own gay liberation days, which today is celebrated in many major cities with pride marches. In addition to this, the feminist movement also gained steam during this time. Betty Friedan began the modern women's movement by publishing The Feminine Mystique in 1963. This book, along with others, drew attention to sexual discrimination and unequal pay for women at this particular time. For instance, the median income for working men and women in the 1970s showed that women earned on average $1 for every $3 a man would earn. Today, that gap has certainly closed. However, women still earn less on average doing the same work that men do. Not only did Friedan publish a book, but she also created an organization. She co-founded the National Organization for Women, otherwise known as NOW, to advocate for women's equality. Now, this is an important note we should make. At this point, the women's rights movement, if we kind of look back, kind of historically, if we go all the way back to 1848, what we should notice is that the women's rights movement began with the movement for political equality, which was achieved with the 19th Amendment, but now has moved into an area of economic equality, which it's still kind of moving into. We also see a similar trend with the African American movement as well, with the civil rights movement, as it begins with a movement for political equality, but has continued to work for economic equality to this day. Now, feminists demanded an Equal Rights Amendment, known as an ERA, to try and ban sexism and unequal pay in the workplace. However, the ERA was eventually defeated, coming up, I think, just 1 or 2 votes short. It had passed both the 2 houses of Congress, but it had not gone 3/4 of all states to ratify it. Conservatives and anti-ERA women, such as the woman you see pictured here, her name was Phyllis Schlafly, believed that women's rights were protected by the Civil Rights Act. In fact, believed that the ERA would kind of destroy the lives of women. Well, either way, many states, especially in the South, refused to ratify the ERA. Now, they did have some successes, though. For instance, they gained abortion rights in 1973 with the passage of Roe v. Wade, and Title VII and Title IX were both important laws that were also passed during this time. Title VII protected women from sexual harassment, and Title IX outlawed sexual discrimination in educational programs. Now, this has important consequences at school. If you add up, for instance, all of the different sports that we have at North Paulding, what you're going to notice is that we have an equal number of opportunities for men and for women in terms of athletic ventures. This also has implications as well at colleges and universities when it comes to the awarding of scholarships. There needs to be an equal number of athletic scholarships for both men and for women at the college level. Leading us now to key idea number 3. Feminists who participated in the counterculture of the 1960s rejected many of the social, economic, and political values of their parents' generation and advocated for change in sexual norms. Now, women that participated in the counterculture challenged traditional sexual norms, and some of those norms included sex outside of marriage, contraception, abortion, and even clothing and dress. For instance, feminists asserted that single women had the same sexual desires and should have the same sexual freedoms as everyone else in society. And for many women, and the new technology, the pill, was a revolutionary breakthrough. It allowed women to separate sex from procreation. In addition to this, in 1973, Roe v. Wade, the court case ruled that women had the right to privacy in medical decisions, allowing them to gain more autonomy over their own bodies and their own actions. Additionally, women also challenged traditional dress and traditional norms, much like the flappers did during the 1920s. For instance, at the Miss America pageant, women gathered together to burn their bras. They also wore shorter dresses, or some examples of their resistance and the sexual revolution that was happening in the late 60s and early 70s. Well, that's our lecture for today. A couple key points. Understand that the civil rights movement is going to inspire other groups to challenge the norms of society and to strive for greater rights and greater access, both social, economic, and political, for themselves. Those groups include Latino Americans, Native Americans, Asian Americans, gay and lesbian Americans, as well as feminists and women as well. Oh, don't forget to smash that like and subscribe button. Until next time, as always, go Pack.